Hi, and welcome to the Boat Princess podcast. My name is Nicky Vaux, and I'm your host. I am a boat owner, a marina owner, a director on the Marina Industries Association, and a huge advocate for boating. In this series, I'm sharing the stories from every nook of the boating industry with the intention of encouraging more women to join me and for more women to get behind the helm too. I want to share the experience and opportunities of boating, of the boating industry, and I want you to join me as I bring the conversations and answer all the questions you've had. Boating is not just for the glamorous and rich and famous. It's full of beautiful and interesting people making the most of our natural environment and getting out there, enjoying the waterways. So let's let off the lines, take over the helm, and escape to the world of boating. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Boat Princess podcast. I am here with Nicole Watts. Now, Nicole is a director at New South Wales Transport Maritime. Both. Yep. So good. And I want to talk to her because she's got an amazing career that we're going to explore with her. But let's start with a really cool thing. You've got 3 letters after your name, which not all of us have, and that is PSM. Tell me about that, Nicole.
Yeah, look, thanks for having me, Nikki. And yeah, look, the PSM is for a public service medal that I was awarded in the 2016 Queen's Honours Awards. So I, at the time, was working for Service New South Wales. I was part of the startup of that. And it was some of the work we did in that space. So that was transitioning roads and maritime services over to those service centres and making it more digital, customer-centric. So yeah, quite exciting. I had to practice my curtsy and go into Government House, and yeah, definitely a career highlight.
Oh, that's amazing. I have to say, as a consumer, I really noticed a difference from RMS to Service New South Wales. You suddenly became as if you weren't a government operation, that you were a corporate operation that focused entirely on the customer. How did you make that transition happen?
Yeah, look, I'm really pleased you noticed that because that was very intentional. So we deliberately took the teams out. I remember going and sitting at the Four Seasons with a bunch of staff, management staff. We had a number of consumer groups that we consulted, and it was all about let's tear down the glass walls. And I don't know if you remember in Roads and Maritime Service, the staff were behind the glass. I mean, now probably pre-COVID, it wasn't a bad idea, but at the time, we went, no, we want to actually engage. And how do we make it a better experience? Because every single person you would speak to would dread it. Go, oh, got to go, spend 40 minutes or an hour lining up. So it was all about, let's have a concierge, someone who greets you, works out what you want and how you can best get that outcome. Let's provide a digital option. Obviously now with everything moving online, I was part of the initial stream that was setting up digital licensing, and that work's ongoing. So I think it was really about making it customer centric and giving the people of New South Wales what they want. When you think about it, Service New South Wales, every single citizen of New South Wales is a customer. So, and it's our taxpayers' money going into it. So really looking back, it was a no-brainer. But yeah, that's definitely some work I'm probably the most proud of, and you're still seeing the benefits. And as a customer going in, it's just such a better experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so much better. Because government customers are kind of a guaranteed customer, right? They have
Absolutely.
to do these things. We have to register our car. We have to get our license. We have to get our boat license. And we have to go to those offices to do that. So, yeah, to turn that around from we know you've got to come in and do it anyway, to well, let's look after you it was amazing transition. Well done.
No, thank you. And look, I can't take all the credit, but certainly, worthwhile being a part of and something I'm still to this day really proud of.
Yeah. So let's go back to your childhood. I look at your career on LinkedIn, very good LinkedIn, by the way, and you have, to me, performed the best you possibly can in every role that you've done. So that has in turn promoted you to a very high level. Where do you think that drive, that passion, that work ethic comes from?
Yeah, look, I think I can answer that really easily because I think that would definitely come from my parents and mostly my mother. From a very early age, she instilled that sense of, work hard, apply yourself. If you're going to do something, don't do it half-heartedly. And that really resonated. She was a business bank manager, and I saw her work exceptionally hard throughout her life. We had a few tough times financially, and at one point I think she had 2-3 additional jobs outside of her job supporting our family, and I think I noticed that, and I took it on board. I remember at uni I was desperate to buy a house, which is a bit weird, I know, as a uni student. And I think I had 5 jobs. So I was waitressing tables, wrapping fish and chips. I had a part-time job at Priceline. I was babysitting. I was just so determined. And I pretty much finished uni and bought the tiny 1-bedroom apartment. But I did that, I think, very early 20s. So, yeah, I would say it probably comes from definitely my parents and the way I was brought up. It was always, work hard, apply yourself, make something of yourself. And yeah, I think, I say that now. I have 2 young boys, 18 months and 4. And with my 4-year-old, I'm already saying that. The other day he came home and he said, I want to be a builder. And I went, brilliant. I said, be a builder, that's great. But you could even be a developer and then you can decide what you want to build. And it's not that there's anything wrong with being a builder, but just opening his mind to think big,
Yes.
even at 4. And I'm sure, next week he'll want to be a, spaceman, or,
Fireman.
astronaut or something. But I think just at an early age, it's so important to have those chats and encourage people to think big.
Yeah, and not limit themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting that you've spent some time working in hospitality. I always say to because I've got uni students that work at our bistro, Waterside Bistro at Bobbin Head, and I say to them, don't ever underestimate what you learn working in hospitality, because it's a stage and it's somewhere you've got to perform, and it's you learn so much about people and how to
100%.
deal with them and all those sorts of things. So I did a lot of hospitality work in my early career, and I think it's something nobody should ever miss out on doing, to be honest.
Completely agree. It is such a good training ground, and it really put me in good stead. It's funny, I've done, university degree, and I look at, I've done a graduate certificate. I'm just about to embark on an executive master in public admin. But taking all that education aside, some of the best lessons I've ever learned have been on the job in those exact roles you're talking about, hospitality, retail, and they're things I still use today.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that university. What did you do at university and where?
So I started off in international business. So that was Griffith University on the Gold Coast. I grew up on the Gold Coast. And then I changed to business and communication. So that was my original degree. But I've always, I've been focused on kind of continually improving myself. So I've gone over to Harvard and done an executive course there, and that was breakthrough service. And again, just learning to apply those principles. I did a graduate certificate in public policy and public administration. And as I say, I'm now doing an executive master's as well. And I think, even beyond that, at some point I wouldn't mind doing a law degree, not because I want to practice law, but I just have an interest. And I think, that sort of desire to learn, it never goes for me anyway. And again, I encourage others to do that. Keep your mind active. For me, I just love learning. And it's hard, right? We're all busy working, and, many of your listeners will be parents as well. Sometimes it's hard to find the time to read a book or to carve out time for yourself. I find when I commit myself to study, it kind of allows me to feel a little less guilty about doing something for me as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And tell me about that Harvard process. Is that something anybody can do, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so there is I think a selection process, but it was fairly easy to get into, and it's not, you don't have to submit prior grades or anything like that. They're really looking for executives who are focused on bettering themselves, and I would highly encourage anyone, if they've got the opportunity to do that, to do so, because you go, the course I did, it was just a week 3-week course, but you're with a cohort from all around the world. So the network, many of those people I'm still in contact with today. And also you do case studies on different businesses, and, you spend prior to the course some time doing research and presenting papers. And then you're having a discussion and they go, oh, and we've actually got the CEO here today. And so you go, wow, and you actually get to engage and then present to real people who've actually lived that experience. I just found it phenomenal. Yeah. I'd love to go back, and that's something I wouldn't rule out either.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's it's not bad on the CV, is it?
No, look, I'm sure it helps.
So you started your career, if I'm correct, after all those jobs you did at uni and so on and so forth, with Carnival.
Yeah, and that was actually a bit of a whim, to be honest, because I finished uni and I went, where do I start? What do I want to do? And I don't know, I'd always wanted to travel, and I had a friend who went and ran away and worked on cruise ships, and I thought, oh, that sounds great. So I applied, and I started off in sales. So literally as the onboard sales manager, so selling cruises to people already traveling. It was an amazing opportunity. You would work 7 days a week, but I would say every night was like a Friday night. Every morning, unfortunately, was like a Monday morning. But, every second, third day, you'd be in a different country. I did a lot of European seasons and a couple of world cruises as well. And really, I was paid to see the world and grew my career whilst I was there. I became the commercial manager. So again, that was looking after sort of all the onboard concessions, the casinos, the shops. But again, built a great network, and just, you're working with so many different cultures, different people. Again, you talk about hospitality being a good stomping ground and that customer service. Well, you're living with your customers. And I think I learned so much from that as well. Look, I did that for a few years, and to be honest, I probably could have done it forever. It was only that I went, I probably should at some point settle down and meet someone. And, you do miss out on sort of birthdays and special events back home. So I decided to sort of end it. But to be honest, I'm envious. I still have friends in the industry, and, I'll be in the office and they're on the Greek islands or somewhere, and you go, oh, maybe I should have stayed. But no, it was a great start. Really, really lucky to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Cruises are they're quite incredible, aren't they? They attract so many different types of people.
Definitely.
And having been on one myself, it's kind of like a demographic experiment, There's some people that head towards the casino. There's others that always go to the buffet and never go to the fine dining, and vice versa. And it's a fascinating world to work in, I can imagine.
Yep. Yeah, it really, really was. And look, I spent 8, nearly 9 years in the UK. Off the back of that, I met connections. I worked at Harrods. I did a few things, to be honest. I think looking back in my early 20s, I sort of just went with the different opportunities that were presented, and I probably didn't have a path, which is very unlike me. Yeah. But I would not change it, because I think that those skills and the connections have landed me ultimately where I am today. But it's interesting looking back, I didn't sit down in school or even in uni and go, I'm going to go and work on a cruise ship. Yeah. Kind of just happened. But I look back and go, thank goodness I did.
Yeah. Yeah. You sound like a person, which I always advocate for, listen for opportunities that come your way. Some people are sort of closed-eared to what might be in front of them in a conversation, which could actually be an amazing opportunity for them.
Absolutely.
But if we listen for them, we can often, luck that some people refer to isn't necessarily the case. Often it's, I heard that opportunity, I took the risk, I went for it. And you sound like you've done a lot of that in your life.
Yeah, I think so. And you know what? I think you're absolutely right. I think, for all intents and purposes, it's great to have a plan in life, but some of the best opportunities that'll come your way won't be on your plan. And I think you're right, being open to that. When I look at, many of the people I look up to, they've also been very much like that, and I think even looking at, some of the more famous people out there who are very, very successful, they've done similar. Some of them didn't know what they wanted to do, even in their 40s, their 50s, and they've been really open to that. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting theme to explore.
Yeah. So after Carnival, what happened then?
I think, look, I had some time working in Harrods, and I kind of put, my main careers on LinkedIn, but I did a few things. Eventually I came back to Sydney. My family were on the Gold Coast, but I'd spent some time in London. And I went, Gold Coast just feels a bit small, so I'll move to Sydney. And of course, I rented a ridiculously expensive apartment right on Kent Street, which was so not practical.
Nice spot.
You realise, even things like shopping, you can't just pull up at Woolworths. So anyway, it was fun. And interestingly enough, I thought I'd dated a few people in the UK and not had a great deal of success. I just want to meet a nice Australian man, settle down, and focus on career and what that looks like. And I decided by that point I was ready to get out of the cruise ship industry. Look, fast forward, probably I decided to go into government. That was probably Service in South Wales was my next big thing once I came. And by that point I was, 29, 30, I think early 30s. And I think at the same time I met my now husband, who, would you believe, is English. So I still go back to London, UK every year.
Nice.
Wouldn't change it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the time where I really went, what do I want to do? And I spent, 3.5 years with Service in South Wales. Really, really enjoyed it. Really felt like the work was meaningful. And what I mean by that is, I realize I'm not a neurosurgeon. I'm not curing cancer. And at times it can be hard to find value or see the importance. But Service in South Wales was the first role I had where I felt like it was having an impact, even if it was saving people a couple of hours. We used to sort of say, you have people from birth to death, you're issuing birth certificates, you're issuing the death certificate. You would also see people at the hardest points in their lives. So if you could streamline that and make it easier, it felt meaningful. So I really enjoyed that. But during that time, again, I spent a lot of time at Apple and working with Apple because I love their service model. I love the technology. And again, being open to networks, I got approached a couple of times to go and work for Apple. And I said no the first 2 times. And the third time I thought, if I say no now, they're probably not going to ask again.
Yeah.
And even though I could have stayed at Service in South Wales, I went, what have I got to lose? So I actually went and worked for Apple in a senior manager role. And that was really, really interesting, involved with new store openings, leading the retail teams. You had a lot to do with the US, the head office in Singapore. I really, really enjoyed it. But I must admit, probably sort of halfway through, I realized with Apple, and it's phenomenal, but you really are a very small part of this huge beast, and everything is given to you. So there's not a lot of room at the level in Australia anyway that I was at to innovate or to really make a difference. Those sort of decisions were made in Cupertino. And I don't know, whilst I enjoyed it, I went, I just don't know that this is me long term. I want something a little bit more. And it felt a bit small, which sounds crazy, I know, when you talk Apple. But
because your role there wasn't small, was it?
And it wasn't.
No.
But I just felt like, you were given the plans, go execute. And after Service in South Wales, I was used to coming up with the ideas and really having a voice at the table. And I think, unfortunately, and it may have changed now, but being part of Southeast Asia and that remit, we just didn't have probably as huge a footprint in terms of that leadership space.
Because they think our market's small compared to what they used to.
And it was back then. So everything was sort of, we've just done this in the US. Here you go and do it. And after a while I went, I'd like to do this. Or I don't know, I just probably didn't find what I was looking for, which was a bit disheartening because I really thought it was going to be, I would stay with Apple. I was waxing lyrical. If you knew me at the time, I had every Apple gadget. I was
because they were really at the forefront at one stage, weren't they? They were incredibly innovative.
They were everywhere. And it was interesting. I think halfway through I went, whilst it's Apple and this is such a great opportunity, I actually am not loving this as much as I thought.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes, and I think it was the first time ever in my career that I'd had that recollection. And I almost felt like, maybe I had made the wrong move.
Yeah.
So look, I thought I'd see out at least a year because I was conscious of how that would look on my CV and also not wanting to disappoint the people who'd believed in me and the network. But I decided that I wanted something else. And then I came back to, again, what do I do next? Like, it's hard because I didn't really have this plan and I'd done sort of random things that I'd enjoyed. And And again, I'm scrolling through, and I think it was Seek back then. And this opportunity at Qantas came up, and I've always loved to travel. And I think, since my cruise ship days, I think I'd visited over 100 countries then, and every opportunity I had, I would travel. So I applied, and I remember sitting in a room. There were quite a few, a couple of hundred applicants, and it was a full day of exercises, and you'd be judged. And I didn't know how it would go. But yeah, I ended up securing a role as ground operations manager, and sort of grew that into a regional ground ops manager role. And that was responsible for sort of all your baggage handlers, your ramp assistants, your customer service teams. And it ended up being a phenomenal career. One of the great benefits with Qantas is, you obviously get staff travel. So I was able to do a lot of travel all around the world, but also an opportunity to really reshape the culture at Qantas and to find we had a lot of sort of blue collar staff. And I don't say that derogatorily. I mean, there are amazing people, but
incredibly vital.
But very different. I remember my first day at Qantas, and I don't know if I should say this, but I will. And they went, "Oh, you've come from Apple." And one of the, the baggage handlers showing me the iPad, and there's a girl bent over, and we'll leave it there in the bikini. He went, "Oh, I probably shouldn't have showed you that." I went, "You probably shouldn't." And that was my welcome to Qantas. It was like, so culturally, it felt meaningful. We changed that culture. And, I was the only woman there. It was all very heavily male dominated. But again, it was opening their eyes to different possibilities. We got a lot more women working out, because guess what? Women can lift bags too.
Yeah.
Women can, actually manage the ramps. Our women tend to be very customer service, front desk based. So we sort of flipped that, changed it up a bit. And we got great results. We saw the customer satisfaction results improve, on-time performance improve. And again, I was very cognizant. I wasn't curing cancer, but it felt meaningful. And I've realized for me, whatever I'm doing, I've got to feel like I'm adding value. And I loved Qantas. And to be honest, I could have stayed forever.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, COVID then occurred.
Okay.
So pandemic happens, and, we had planes grounded. In fact, at one point we had no planes flying, I think, at all.
Yeah.
I had all my team stood down, thousands of people. And
that would have been so hard.
Horrendous.
Yeah.
And then my role became to make everyone redundant. They ended up outsourcing those roles. So I would literally all day, every day, be on the phone, be on a Teams call with people who had been there 30, 40 years. And it was horrible. We had a couple of staff, unfortunately, who didn't cope well and suicidal. I won't go into some of that. But at the end of that experience, Qantas had always been great to me, and there was still a role for me. But I think, being very values driven, I couldn't have stayed knowing that my entire team had been forced to go.
Yes.
And I think also the uncertainty of the pandemic and what would happen sort of made me reevaluate what was important, and realizing that, job's not secure. And if that job is not secure, what does that mean for my lifestyle? At the time, I had then I think it was about 2, but thinking about my family, and that made me probably reassess. So again, I then went, what do I do?
Can we just go back a little bit and unpack that moment where you were making people redundant? Now, it's horrible for the person being made redundant, but I think sometimes people don't realise how hard it is for the person giving that news as well, because they've still got a role that they kind of think, they're okay because they've still got a job. But it is a really hard thing to do. How did you cope with that at the time? Did you have some sort of coping mechanisms you used, or did you lean on people to handle that for you? How did you do that?
Yeah, look, we were given, EAP, so employee assistants that we could talk to. We could talk to each other because there were other business units doing it. But to be honest, nothing really prepares you. The amount of days, in all honesty, I would go home, I'd be hysterical in the car, because you'd know that there were certain roles, they were very niche to the airline industry, and this was happening across aviation. So you knew that this was the end of someone's career. They were very unlikely to get another job. And unfortunately, what transpired was, you'd have very experienced people packing shelves at Woolworths.
Yes.
You know, some people were able to gain, you know, good employment, and again, not taking away from anyone who does that at Woolworths, but given that these people had these skills, you'd see engineers. In the end, we had pilots doing the same. I mean, it was a really strange time, and I struggled. I'd be lying. I think it definitely kept me up at night. And as I say, I had a couple of staff who were suicidal. There were attempts on their lives, and very, very difficult. And I think mentally, if I'm honest, I did struggle. And look, I have an amazing supportive husband, great friends and family who I was able to talk to. But even still, I think until you experience that and you're in it, it's very hard to understand. And just the dread. You know, I used to drive into Qantas, music blasting, just loving life, loving my job. And there are so many great people who, you know, have gone through that process. They're still there doing great work. And I think, you know, very fondly for the most part of my time there. But that all changed when that happened. I remember I'd just go in and I'd feel sick. I'd have this anxiety, you know. And all you can do is, you know, sort of separate yourself, understand the situation and support those people. And what I would do is, it wouldn't just be your redundant goodbye. It was constant check-ins, looking at Seek, Indeed, flicking them roles, being a reference, trying to go, you know, over and above whatever you could do to serve them. And in many situations, you know, I'm proud to say we were able to find other people meaningful work, not always. That kind of helped me live with myself a bit more. Yeah,
that's great.
You know?
Yeah. So after Qantas, what happened then?
So I'm looking, what do I do? I thought back to where I was happiest prior to Qantas, and it was government. It was Service New South Wales. And there wasn't a lot happening there at that point in terms of roles.
Apart from the big queue outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And
obviously
the market was actually really tight then, because a lot of people were looking at the same thing, right? There are a lot of people laid off at that time. And so I looked at Transport for New South Wales. There was actually a role in the Rail Ops Centre in Alexandria. And
okay, just before we go into that, I mean, you've done Carnival Cruises, you've done, I know you did Westfield for a while as well, right? You've done Harrods, you've done Service New South Wales, you've done Apple, you've done Qantas. What makes you as a woman go, oh look, there's a position in train ops, I'll just go into that? What makes you do that? Where do you get that confidence from to do that?
Yeah, look, I think I'd sort of done transport a bit. You know, I kind of went, oh, airplanes, trains. I know that's a bit weird. And I thought it's government. And I wasn't probably too caught up in the actual role, because I think when you're in leadership, it's about inspiring your people and engaging your people. So sometimes I don't necessarily look at the role per se. Again, I look at where I can add value, and I was probably more focused on that. But I've also learnt to back myself. And sorry, you know, I skipped over Westfield. We could probably unpack that, because that was actually another chunk before Service in New South Wales. And sorry, I got a little bit caught up there. But I look at, you know, often the roles I've had, you know, would a male not apply because he didn't have the confidence? Or no, wait, they just put themselves there, they throw their hat in, and even if they don't have the skills, and I've got many male colleagues who do that. And for a number of years, and I will probably throw in Westfield very quickly, and I hope I'm not confusing the listeners, but I remember I was a shopping centre manager at Westfield, an assistant shopping centre manager, had a couple of stints in the shopping centre manager role too, but there was a development happening in one of the centres. And at the time, it was going to be a lot more work, you know, working at 2 a.m. in the morning. I went, oh, I should negotiate my salary, but I feel a bit awkward. I never asked. And I remember speaking to some of my team a couple of months down the track. They had all negotiated their salaries, renegotiated $50,000, $70,000 more.
Wow.
And then I went and had the conversation post and was told, oh, look, all we could do at this point is an extra $3,000. I then left Westfield. But that was a good lesson. Coming back to what you've asked me is, I've learned to back myself, you know. You don't ask, you don't get. You don't try, you don't get. What is the worst that can happen? Someone says no. And I find often in speaking to women, both colleagues, people, you know, within my team, for some reason there's this fear to ask the question, to put ourselves out there. And I don't know where that is driven from. And I hope today, if we unpack this a bit more, we can give some advice to our listeners to actually say to them, back yourself, trust in yourself, because what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
And this is a good example. I put myself out for that role. I was unsuccessful. I made it to the top 3. And the person who got the role actually had experience in rail operations. I did not, so it wasn't a great surprise. But the recruiter said to me, look, they were really happy with your interview and there's some other director roles coming up. Would you be interested? And I went, well, yeah, I would. Please, keep me on file. And I kept in touch with that recruiter. I didn't hold out great hope. And I must admit, I sort of thought, oh, that's probably just lip service to make me feel better.
Yep.
But funny enough, I think it was sort of 6-7 weeks later, I get a call. Nicole, we've got this role. It's in Maritime. And it's also Wollongong based. You said you were based in Wollongong. Would you be interested? And I went, well, Maritime, I haven't really had a lot to do with, the boating industry. And sort of, again, that doubt crept in. But I went, yeah, why not? Send me the job description. And I had a look. They went, oh, look, it's closing today. So if you want to apply, you need to have your application in by 5 o'clock. And I went, what have I got to lose? So I did a bit of, I put my application in. I did a bit of research. 2 days later, I interviewed for my current role. And again, it was COVID. So it was all on Teams. And I remember actually quite an awkward interview because halfway through there was a delivery man and he was very persistent. He knew I was home and he's buzzing. I'm thinking, oh God. I'm like, sorry, excuse myself from the interview. But yeah, taking that gamble has paid off. And interestingly enough, it was, a few months of interviews before they decided on the candidate. And 2 weeks after the first interview, I discovered I was pregnant with my second child.
Wow.
So, and which was exciting, but also I went, oh, this is a bit awkward. And, how do I navigate this? Because all the interviews are on Teams. Like, do I just kind of get up at some point and show I've got a bit of a bump? And then I went to, I don't want to be discriminated against. And I had faith that I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
But I just didn't intrinsically trust that maybe I wouldn't be looked over. So I went through that process. Fortunately, I was offered the role and then went, well, I can't accept because I want to have integrity here. I need to be honest. And so I remember I was so nervous. And at the time I was living in a townhouse in lockdown with a 2-year-old.
Yeah, which is challenging in itself.
I'm hiding in my walk-in closet and I've got notes written on the laptop around how I'm going to tell them I'm pregnant. It was quite the comedy act. And I'm sweating and look, I really want to accept the role, but there's something I need to tell you. I'm actually, and by this point, I think I was 6 months pregnant. And I have to, call out my executive director, Mark Hutchings, at the time. He went, oh, brilliant. That's great. Well, not an issue. And he just continued to talk about the role. It wasn't even a blip on his radar.
Yeah.
Afterwards, he sent me this amazing email around, how supportive he is of women and all of this stuff. And I kind of went, wow, is this for real? And 2 years later, I can tell you he absolutely was for real. The experience has been phenomenal. So I took the role, had 14 weeks in role, and then took 3 months maternity leave, which again was interesting during lockdown. And then came back into the role. I decided purposely to have a shorter maternity leave because, again, I wanted to do the right thing by the organisation. And also being in lockdown, I felt it was manageable. That's another story. That was probably one of the hardest periods of my life.
Yeah.
But, the gamble paid off. And it's interesting. I didn't have a boating background.
Yeah.
But the work we are doing is so meaningful. It's
very
life-saving.
Important. Very, literally life-saving. Yeah.
And I love it. And it was the best move. And now I can see a path forward. You know how it's almost, I'm 40 now, 41 this year. God, I hate to say that out loud.
No, don't worry, babes. It gets better. But 40s is actually your best, I reckon.
Do you reckon?
Oh,
excellent.
It's so good.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
I must admit I wouldn't want to go back. Every year I think it just does. It gets better and you have that level of confidence. But I can see, I could see myself staying in Maritime, in transport, being executive director, going on to be a deputy secretary and then a secretary. I've even thought about at one point, it's a bit ludicrous, but going into politics. I feel so inspired. I feel like I've finally found my place. It's interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I have to say, you have a great leader. Mark Hutchins is an incredible guy. And I think he instills a behaviour in his team that is a little bit different to the norm of a government agency. Like you messaged me last night at 8 o'clock to confirm our podcast today. The government agency workers don't normally do that, right? So I know that's a bit of a generalisation, but I think Mark he's got so much passion, and he's so driven, and he's very sensible as well. He's very considered. Darren and I have been lucky to spend some time with Mark, and he is a brilliant leader. And I think we work with leaders that we really respect, and I can see that in you, that you respect him. I even had a girl stay. I have another business called Venus Getaways, which is a girls' getaways business up in the Blue Mountains.
Oh, we need to talk about this.
We need to talk about that. And we had a group of girls stay just before Christmas, and I ended up being their butler because both of my butlers were, off with COVID or whatever was going on at the time. So, and one of the girls there was in telecommunications for emergency services. She was the one that was deploying the helicopter to go and fix the pole thing in the middle of the country because of the floods. They couldn't get, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And she was there supposedly on a weekend away, but she was continuously working, even though she was on a leave day. And I thought that's not normal government agency behaviour. And I said, so what do you? I said your job's. I just heard the conversation she was having on the phone.
Yeah.
I said your job sounds amazing. What do you do? And she explained what she did. And then I said, oh, do you work with Mark? And she said, I do. I said, oh, okay, there we go. There's another, and he obviously really supports women in their roles.
100%. If I can jump in there, I have to say he has anything I've sort of said, I've wanted to do, he backs you, he listens, he really promulgates women. I mean, 50% of our leadership team is women. He doesn't do that to tick a quota. He actually believes in equality. He wants us to have equal say. He's driven a number of programs throughout Maritime to encourage women to join, to kind of break down that stigma that it's really blokey industry. And for me personally, coming into a director role, 6 months pregnant, and then, restarting with a tiny newborn during COVID. I remember we'd be doing budget estimates to Parliament, and I'm on Teams and I'm having to give information. I've got a screaming baby, and my husband kind of passing him under the table, and I just pull a boob out, and I'm, yep, blah 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 blah, reciting, and afterwards joking to Mark about that, and him being like, oh, if you can't do it, or if you ever need to take time out or delegate, that's okay, and just allowing me the space and the flexibility. And you know what? I made it work because he's always given me so much flexibility and backed me. I've wanted to work 10 times harder. And I can tell you right now, I would do anything for him and for Maritime, whether that is on a weekend, after hours, I will make it work because he and our organisation makes it work for us. And it's amazing. I think it's finding, and I would say this to women listening today, it's so important that you find your mark. You find an organisation that will support you, because people say, can you have it all? And wow, you've got, sort of 2 young kids, and how do you do it? You know how I do it? I have an amazing network. I have an amazing boss who allows me to do it. Also marry well. Having an amazing husband, family, it really does help. But I think times have changed. We have flexibility. We're not tied to an office 9 to 5. There's good and bad, because to your point, sometimes that means, there is that expectation that you will jump onto things a little bit earlier or later. In our situations, we look after flood response. There are emergencies. Unfortunately, there are fatalities, and those things don't happen 9 to 5. They typically happen on a Saturday morning when I've got the 4-year-old at swimming lessons and I'm wrangling. But it's amazing what you can do. And I think, again, we've got to stop putting limits on ourselves, because no one else is. I think the people who put limits on themselves the most are actually you and I. It's the listeners on the call. We do it to ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that point that you make there of surrounding ourselves with men that support us, I think, some women in their drive to get more women into their industry or whatever, take a little bit of a man-hating approach. And I don't think that's the right approach. We need to recognise that we need men helping us, supporting us, pushing us, putting us into positions we didn't think we could do, but they think we can. I think the men in our world are really, really important for that. I certainly wouldn't be here in the position I am in and doing what I'm doing without the men I have around me. My husband, my dad, my people I've worked with, my marina director. There's so many men that have helped me become who I am. And I think we need to recognise that, and I think we need to be grateful to them for being that, you know, because there's some
100%.
men that aren't, and they need to teach those other men to be like them. So
could not agree more, Nikki. I think you've really just hit the nail on the head with that. And I hope, you know, in the two boys I'm raising, I want to raise them to support women and to understand the challenges, you know, that unfortunately it still isn't equal. You only have to look at, and we won't get into it, but, you know, the gender pay differences and different things going on. And also, you know, representation. I'm lucky. I work for an organisation where we do have equal representation, but I'm not naive enough to think that is the case across the board. It certainly isn't. So I think as women, it's absolutely recognising those men in our lives, celebrating those men, encouraging that, but also where we can, you know, teaching, if you've got boys, if you have girls, having these conversations at a young age too, so they grow up to support women. You know, I know of friends who are, you know, you'll laugh at this maybe, but they're teaching their little boys around, you know, what periods are at a young age. And if a girl, this happens, give her a tampon.
Yeah.
Do this. And because they don't ever want, you know, a girl to be in a situation where she's embarrassed in class. They want to raise the kind of men that bring women up. And I think, wow, because I don't know that when I was in school that was happening. I remember if, God forbid, you know, a girl had an accident, or, you know, the boys would all laugh, or they'd throw around the tampons if they found it. I think times are changing, and I love hearing these kind of conversations, because I think it's not just in the workplace where we can have this change, it's at home as well.
I agree. Parents, I think parents of women that are parents of boys have a kind of a responsibility to handle that. I have two boys too. So, but they're a lot older than yours.
Let me know what stage it gets easier. We can talk offline about that.
But I have to say, my two boys are my world, and I'm so incredibly proud of those human beings. But my youngest is in a very good relationship with his girlfriend, and she said a beautiful thing to me the other day. She said, I have learnt by being with Liam that I can be treated well.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's mind-blowingly good for me, because that was part of my role to make him be like that. But I always say that kids don't do what you do what you say. They do what you do. And I've always worked and been part of the earning strategy of our family, and I've always worked hard. I was lucky enough to spend a lot of my time with them as small children, but still doing something that, you know, could work around that. And then my husband treats me in a certain way, and they see that. He's always treated me as a princess, right? That's why the boat princess came back. So them seeing that is an understanding of, oh, okay, that's how we treat women.
Yeah, absolutely. And how impactful is that?
Yeah.
You know, and I think it goes full circle, because now they're treating women that way.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, it's a really worthwhile conversation. And I know I love where we're at right now. I think there's a lot of opportunity, don't get me wrong. But when I look back at sort of where we've come from, going into the future, I'm so excited for the women who are coming up, the women who are in school now, and the opportunities they're going to be afforded and the support they're going to have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's awesome. I love seeing it. Yeah, it's so good.
Same.
So you're doing an exceptionally good job on this podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I know you've been thrown into the media spotlight a bit more than maybe you have been in your past career recently.
Yes.
Yeah, because you did a presentation to the Boating Industry Association. Mm-hmm. That's how I said, I've got to talk to her. And then you were on 2SM, and then Channel 9 through a moment at you. How was that for you? Tell us about that experience.
Look, the Channel 9 one was probably the highlight or low light, depending on which way you want to look at it. That was a live interview, and I don't know how many of your listeners have had that experience, but I had the questions literally a second before they went, "Oh, we're kind of going to ask you this," boom, and they wanted to line me up with the screen so it presented well aesthetically, so that I'm balanced on 3 boxes. I'm in 6-inch heels. If I move an inch to the left or right, I'm going to topple over. I'm dripping with sweat, and then it's go, and you've got someone in your ear asking you all the questions. Look, very, very nerve-wracking, but again, what an opportunity, and I will never say no to SM. These things are never easy, and you're always nervous around what you're going to be asked, if you're going to be asked something contentious. Working for government, things can be political, and there are things you can't really talk about versus things you can, and wanting to make sure, you're really selling your agency right, but being truthful and I guess, as transparent as possible. But it's a lot going on in your mind when you're answering those questions.
Absolutely.
And as uncomfortable it is, I'll never say no, because we have this role to play, particularly in Maritime, where we can, my job is education. Yeah, we do compliance. So we're out on the waterways, making sure that people are following the rules and the handbook. But ultimately, we want to educate. We don't want to get to a serious incident. We won't want to give infringements. We want to encourage everyone to follow the rules and be safe. Since summer, the start of the boating season, we've had over 120 incidents. We've had a number of fatalities. It's absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
And more often than not, when we look at the incidents, it's simple things. They don't have a life jacket. They haven't checked the conditions. They're not familiar with the local area or the waterway, the changes that have occurred. So when I get a media opportunity, as much as I go, "Oh, I don't want to do it," or "I don't want to drive into Sydney," it's not about me. I kind of flip it and go, who can I get? And if I can save one life, if I can prevent one incident because someone hears that message, then it is so worthwhile. It's worthwhile me potentially looking like an idiot for 15 minutes. So I guess that's my take on it. And I've really been putting myself out there for these opportunities. And yeah, it's been radio. As you say, we had the Channel 9 interview. Prior to that, I do a lot of local media as well. And for the most part, it's overwhelmingly positive. And when it isn't, it gives yourself a good, opportunity to have a laugh at yourself. And, my friends have a good laugh too. That's happened occasionally. But yeah, I think it comes back to some of my earlier messaging, Nikki, around we just have to put ourselves
just
out
believe
there.
in yourself a bit.
Because had I not, even the boating industry presentation, I'll be honest, I thought, oh, it's going to be a bunch of guys. And it was. I think there was...
And they really know their stuff too.
2 other women there. Yep. And you're getting up and it's nerve-wracking. And I don't have a maritime background. So I'm almost 2 years enrolled, 20 months to be precise. And some of this stuff I'm still learning because, again, my role is really around that leadership, cultural change, engagement. I've got experts within my team who know the technical aspects. So I'm still learning. And you think, oh, what curly question could I be asked? But when you put yourself out there, for the most part, people are respectful. If you don't know a question, you can always take it on notice. A little bit harder to do on live TV, but it's certainly easier in a presentation.
Yeah.
But people generally are kind. The interviews go well. And as I say, the odd occasion, if it doesn't, it's a good opportunity to reflect and laugh. But I'm so pleased I've done it. I wouldn't have met you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had this opportunity. And I think the more you say yes, the more opportunities you get and the more you grow as a person. And each and every time I learn something about myself.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Putting ourselves out there can be scary, but I know doing this podcast, I've learnt so much about myself as well as the people I've interviewed. Yeah. And it's fascinating to see yourself grow when you have to do something that is a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah. So, yeah.
And you don't grow, I think, if you don't put yourself in those situations.
Yeah.
You can't expect to do the same every single day and see a change or see that career growth. So, whatever you're doing, I think it's good to be in that uncomfortable space. You don't want to be too uncomfortable, but it's all right to be a little bit on edge. And I think I quite enjoy it. Oh, it feels weird saying that out loud, but I think I do. I kind of thrive on the energy that brings and definitely the opportunities that come from it.
Yeah. So I did a little video the other day on my boat I was driving the boat because we went out. We actually went out of the heads. It was a bit of a moment, because not a lot of Aussies do necessarily go out of the heads. So we went out of the heads up to Pittwater, Broken Bay, all that area.
Yep.
And I did message in that, talking. Okay, I have checked the weather extensively before I have left on this trip, because we literally kept an eye on it for a week before, and it would change slightly. We go, blah, blah, blah. And there's so many brilliant apps for doing that now.
Yep.
There's Decky, and there's I think it's called Willy, which is
Yep.
And there's the Bomb, of course, and which are we allowed to call it the Bomb now?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Yep.
And
Bureau of Meteorology, in case anyone is unsure.
Bureau of Meteorology, and there's so many good ones out there to use before we go boating. You've got a specific message that you're really pushing at the moment in Maritime. Can you unpack that for me?
Yeah, look, I'd love to. And it really is the 3 Ps. So plan, prepare, predict. And it's exactly what you just said. Plan for the trip. Keep an eye on the weather leading up to it. Make sure you're familiar, and make sure that it's great to be committed and have a plan, but make sure that you are willing to step out of that plan if the weather doesn't support it. In a number of our incidents and unfortunately fatalities, we see people commit, and even though the weather is bad, they either don't check or they check and go, oh, but I've committed, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Please don't. If you're in doubt or you're not confident with those weather conditions, don't go out. The other thing is preparing, and it sounds so simplistic, but have working life jackets on board that are serviced and up to date. Make sure all your safety equipment is in good working order. Really simple things, but again, in a number of the incidents we're seeing, people don't have a life jacket. They don't have the necessary safety equipment. And the same goes for your boat. Over COVID, we've seen a lot of people come into the industry, a lot more users on our waterways now. So, I think we've got 500,000 licensed users. I think there's about 2 million watercraft now in New South Wales alone. So phenomenal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people going, oh, I'm just going to buy a boat. They don't really have the background, the knowledge. They might not even have, I guess, the experience to know what to check. So I would recommend purchasing a boat. Once you've got a boat, really understanding how that boat works and what good working condition means. Because again, some of the boats we're seeing out there and the watercraft, they're just not in good condition. And if you unfortunately do have an incident, it's not going to give you the protection that you need. And finally, just predicting as much as possible. So it comes back to predicting the weather, knowing the waterways. And, we're seeing a lot of holiday, people who go out once a year, maybe they go to Tweed Heads or down the South Coast and it's a holiday spot, and they think they know that waterway because perhaps they've been going 20, 30 years. But you know what? With the inclement weather we've seen, the recent floods, there are debris in areas that we've never seen debris before.
And silt changing depths of waterways,
absolutely.
all sorts of things.
There's silt, there's sand build up. It's just not the same. So as much as possible, you really need to prepare, have a look at what those waterways are looking like in this current condition. Have a chat to locals in the area before you go out. Check, are there any bars? Are there any things that maybe I haven't come across before that I'm going to come across today, and prepare for that. So it's, again, plan, prepare, and as much as you can, predict before you go out, because, I would say 8 out of 10 times, maybe even 9 out of 10 times, the fatalities, the incidents we're seeing, they could have been preventable. And it's these simple things that just aren't happening. And I get it. We're confident. We think we know the waterways, but they're not the same. We go, oh, the life jacket's fine. But that life jacket, if you haven't been out in a year, takes you 2 minutes, not even, to check and make sure it's in working condition.
Yeah. I know myself.
Things.
We've got a big boat. She's 58 feet. So our life jackets are in a nice little cupboard down in the bedroom, keep it, nice and tidy. But I got 2 out and had them very available to us should we need them for that trip. We also registered in with Maritime. There's a fantastic app, isn't there?
Yes.
That if you're going outside the heads, you say, I am travelling from here to here. And then they know that oh, they haven't got to where they should have got to by this time. We need to investigate what's happened there. So because you check in when you're leaving, you check in when you get to your destination. If you haven't reached your destination, they then know something may have gone wrong with that boat. We need to maybe go and look for them.
Absolutely.
I think that's a fantastic system.
And again, it's just an extra precaution. It's no different to sort of smart traveller. If you're going overseas, you register. I think, that's a really good point. And similarly, I love that you actually got the life jackets out, because potentially might not be as helpful in the cupboard, or it's really simple stuff. But again, it could just save your life.
Yeah.
We had a boat capsize last week, and thankfully 2 young children, parents, all in life jackets, all saved, all happy and healthy. That could have been a very, very different outcome. In fact, I can guarantee you it would have been a different outcome, and a very tragic one at that. So I think, it's just not overestimating or underestimating, more to the point, the conditions, your level of confidence with the waterways, and just taking a few precautions. At the end of the day, we want everyone to enjoy it. We are so fortunate to live where we live, have these amazing waterways, and thankfully, I'll touch wood, but we've had a great summer, and let's hope the sunshine continues. But a few precautions is all it takes to make sure you can enjoy it safely and you can continue to enjoy it.
Yeah. And I think there's some really simple safety messages I'd like to get out there for boating. I do a little safety, when I've got a group of people on my boat, I do a little safety briefing before we go out. And it's just simple things like, this is where the life jackets are. If something happens, listen to what the captain says, or listen, if that's me, that's me. And also, 3 points of your body onto the boat, holding on at all times when you're walking around. So it's 2 feet, 1 hand usually. And just those simple messages, especially for people that have never been on a boat before, they'll make a certain assumption that they're going to be okay, but they may not know that you might hit a wave at any point. And if you're not holding on with those 3 points, that could be a bit ugly. You could just fall over really nastily, and then you're in a really different situation. And the other message I really want to get across is babies.
Yes.
So many people take their babies on a boat, and they'll have them in their arms, so they assume that they're okay, but and they don't have a life jacket on them. Please go and get a correct size life jacket for that baby, and put that baby in a life jacket the whole time they are on that boat, because they sink like stones.
Absolutely. And you wouldn't put a baby in a car without a car seat and all buckled in and industry approved. I think that is such a very valid point. It's madness that people, and, I don't want to be disrespectful, but that they think that's okay.
Yes.
And it's just that education piece, because we all, we hope that we're going to go out and have a great time and return safely. But it's, again, that preparation piece. It's so important. If you prepare for the worst, hopefully you'll have, the best will occur and it'll be fine. But we're just not seeing that preparation. And I have to be honest, there are times where, certain incidents, I want to pull my hair out, because you think, what is not getting through?
Yeah.
We have in our business plan, we want 0 fatalities. We're trying to work hard towards 0 fatalities. And we've got boating safety officers out 365 days a year doing compliance. Similarly, we've got boating safety education officers. I don't know if you know this, Nikki, but we go into schools. We're now embarking on a virtual reality program where we can teach local kids how to navigate local waterways as they get their boat license. I mean, we're investing heavily in all of this, but none of it is worthwhile if people don't actually listen and take that messaging on board. And it's sad when sometimes I feel it perhaps is falling on deaf ears, or people are hearing it but just not putting it into action. So we will continue to do everything we can. It's our job. I'm sure it's coming across. We are so passionate about people enjoying the waterways safely, but we really need people to take on notice what we're saying and to really apply it, because 1 fatality is too many. 1 incident is too many. And the numbers we are seeing, it's just not good enough. And we want people to be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, we'll do a couple of questions just to finish up.
Sure.
What excites you the most about being in the boating industry?
Look, I would probably say it's an exciting industry, isn't it? Anyway, I think there are so many components of it, but I would probably say I just love how it brings people together. Boating in general, we weren't a huge boating family, but my recollections of being out in the water is always being with family and friends. There are no barriers ultimately. And yeah, I know it can be expensive to own a boat, but whether it's a tinny, I just think it's such a great experience. And I feel excited to be able to shape and encourage people to do that again in a safe way and to promote it as well. I think that's the benefit of living in Australia. We have all these incredible waterways, perfect, beautiful settings. I'm just excited to be a part of that, to help people to be able to enjoy it safely. I think it's such a privileged position to be in, and if we can get more people out there and enjoy, even going into schools, I'm really passionate about the education piece too, and entice people to do it. I'm hoping today's podcast may just resonate with some of your listeners to want to get into the industry. There's always something new happening. There's some great technology. There's lots of advancements, but ultimately it brings people together. It allows people to enjoy the best of Australia, I think. And I really enjoy it.
Love that. Love that. So thank you so much for being with us here, Nicole. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy girl, so it's great to have you on the podcast. Just one little message to those women out there that may be considering coming into our industry. What would you say to them?
Look, so firstly, Nikki, thank you so much for having me today. It's been my absolute pleasure, and I'll be happy to chat to you anytime. For those women, considering a career in this industry, I would just say to them, 3 words, go for it. Don't put limits on yourself. And, any preconceptions you may have, I can almost guarantee it is not the case. We are finding, it's a very welcoming industry. Both men and women are very, very welcoming. We've got more and more women every day entering the industry, and for the better. They're bringing some great skill, experience, adding a different lens. So I would just say, go for it and reach out. If you've got any questions around how to get involved, by all means, look me up. I'm more than happy to have those conversations as well, because we want to encourage women in this industry to grow and be a part of it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nicole. Really appreciate it. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed that podcast. And I shall see you on the water soon. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Boat Princess podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you'd like to know more about what I do and where I am, then you can follow me on Instagram at The Boat Princess. You can also sign up to my newsletter on my website, which is theboatprincess.com. Take care of yourselves, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you on the water soon.